You know, they want to hire now 5,000 more judges so that a person puts the toe on the land that we have to go to trial. This is crazy what we're doing. I don't want judges. I want Border Patrol. I want ICE.
In other words, more law enforcement, less due process. Very American. A further explanation of that in a tweet over the weekend. Quote, "We cannot allow all of these people to invade our country. When somebody comes in, we must immediately, with no judges or court cases, bring them back where they came. Our system is a mockery to good immigration policy and law and order. Most children come without parents." I don't think that's true. And then more this morning, quote, "Hiring many thousands of judges and going through a long and complicated legal process is not the way to go. Will always be dysfunctional. People must simply be stopped at the border and told they cannot come into the U.S. illegally." Scroll through, up. I'm not reading all this. These are Trump's lies about immigration. Let's get to the good part. All right, while this latest idea from the president may be both legally and morally questionable, there's something else to consider. Trump himself. As the New York Times puts it, Trump didn't exactly retreat after the controversy last week. Instead, he, quote, "went on the offensive, complaining to aides about why he could not just create an overarching executive order to solve the problem." According to two people familiar with the deliberations, aides have had to explain to the president why a comprehensive immigration overhaul is beyond the reach of his executive powers. Privately, the president has groused that he should not have signed the order undoing separations. NBC's Cal Perry is near the border. Steve Schmidt's at the table. So I know he doesn't read books, Steve, but he doesn't read the newspaper either. The last two American presidents tried comprehensive immigration reform. They tried to build a coalition of Democrats and Republicans. George W. Bush did it with the late Senator Kennedy and John McCain. Barack Obama did it with Marco. I mean, how ignorant is he?
He couldn't be more ignorant. He's a supernova of ignorance. It's incredible. Look, there's a couple things going on here. One, he's inciting through mass rallies and constant lying fervor in a political base. He scapegoats minority populations and affixes blame to them for every problem the country faces. He alleges conspiracies of nefarious forces. He creates a mass sense of victimization amongst his base, and then he asserts extraordinary claims of power to protect the victims from the scapegoated populations and the nefarious conspiracy. That is fundamentally illiberal, deeply un-American, and frankly could be straight out of Munich circa 1928. It's very alarming.
And Cal Perry, you've had this sort of out-of-body experience that Steve's talking about. You've been reporting from the border. You've likened it to other conflict zones you've covered. Can you talk about reading those tweets and hearing the president's comments after all the time you've spent down there since this crisis started to unfurl last week?
Yeah, and I had a further one today when I took a tour of the facility, because as we're being walked around by this HHS official, and he's giving us the, well, this was worse during Obama, and 2 years ago it was backed up, and we don't want to see kids on the border. The man who actually runs the facility, who's contracted out by the government, said, and I'm going to directly quote him here, "This wouldn't have been necessary without the separations. The crisis was made as a result of the decision to separate the kids. Separations should have never happened. Quote, the process is flawed, and it harmed the children." So you have this completely bizarre situation where you have a tent city, an internment camp, according to senators who come here and visit and can't get in. You have people inside the facility who are actually running it, saying that they think the policy is ridiculous and they would rather focus on hurricanes. The group that's in charge of this facility did all the recent major hurricanes. They covered Ebola. They did all of the natural disasters. And they said if it was up to us, we would not be doing this. This is crazy.
And this is, John Hyman, a crisis of the president's creation. I watched our Mayor de Blasio this morning. It is now beyond debate that the children have been traumatized. Let's watch him this morning about some of the kids that were in New York, that are in New York.
Our healthcare professionals here in New York City started working with these kids and saw a lot of trauma. Imagine for any one of us if we were taken from our mother or father and no idea, we're sent to a foreign country, no idea what's going on. Maybe we get a phone call or two to a relative, maybe we don't. And no word on when we're ever going to see our parents again. That's affecting these kids deeply, emotionally, in terms of their mental health. We're trying to help them now. But we're talking about now we're creating a generation of kids who are going to live with that real trauma. The medical professionals are telling us they've been treating some of these kids and seeing the signs of trauma and mental health distress. And who wouldn't? What kid wouldn't feel that?
And he knows because some of those separated children are here in New York City.
All due respect to Mayor de Blasio, having listened last week to mental health professionals, pediatricians, and clergy, all of whom made claims that effectively what was going on was child abuse with this policy. I did not need to hear from him today, although it's nice to have some backup from someone who's seeing these people on the ground. But I think it's manifestly clear that if you strip away young children, and I don't necessarily just mean infants, I mean young children up to, so whatever age you want to pick, and you tear them away from their parents, tell them they may never see their parents again, they have no idea where they're going, where they're going to be, whether they're ever going to see a parent again, they're with people who don't understand their language and are not allowed to touch them in some cases, that those kids are going to be traumatized. I mean, you don't even need a medical degree or to be mayor of New York City to know that that's true intuitively. I just do want to come back to one thing that Steve said a second ago, which is the end point. You look at those tweets of Donald Trump, right? For some of us who look at the American system as a paragon of, it's not perfect by any means, and we're all working on trying to make it better and have been for more than 200 years, but due process, separation of powers, those are like the intrinsic things that we look at and say, this is what makes America the greatest country in the world. It's why we don't have autocracy here, why we don't have authoritarians, why our democracy has worked better than any other experiment in liberal democracy in history. And the president both does not understand them. He thinks they are impediments. They are a pain in his ass. Like, he does not want due process. He does not want separation of powers. What he wants is get rid of the process, arrogate all the power to me, and I'm going to do what I want to do. And I think that's why you don't have to go so far as to talk, as some have done, about some of the most authoritarian, despicable, gratuitous, violent regimes in history. You don't have to talk about Pol Pot to get to what's wrong with this view of the world. He lays it out in his Twitter feed every day.
Cal Perry, what are you hearing on the ground from the tone being set in the Oval Office about denying these people due process?
Listen, you go to these courts along the border, and it's just it's a whole different ball game. They just line everybody up in a group. They get about a minute to meet with their lawyer. They're asked, how do you plead? And everybody says in unison, C, and then out they go. And it's a system run by a rich white man. And that's just the reality here on the ground. And this idea that somehow, you don't necessarily have to see a judge in order to get due process is completely crazy, because what these kids are seeing is a military installation where the tents are labeled Alpha 1, Alpha 2, Alpha 3, up to 11. The dining facility is labeled DFAC. The tents are military tents. So when you talk to people down here, what they say is, look, the rhetoric matters, because the rhetoric is what causes the tent city, because it was unnecessary, except they started moving babies around. And the rhetoric, it also affects just the everyday life, like in public schools, where attendance is down from undocumented individuals.
Steve Schmidt, so Donald Trump doesn't believe in due process for people coming to our country seeking asylum or for a better life. But you know who he wanted due process for? Remember Rob Porter? So here's what he said about Rob Porter, credibly accused of beating, I believe, more than one wife. People's lives are being shattered and destroyed by a mere allegation, tweeted the president. Some are true and some are false. Some are old and some are new. There's no recovery for someone falsely accused. Life and career are gone. Is there no such thing any longer as due process?
There's a tweet for everything.
Right, can't make it up. Listen, this policy is one of purposeful, abject cruelty and meanness. It's not accidental. This is Donald Trump, and he's using very purposeful words: infestation, invasion, to incite fervor in a base. He doesn't even have a pretense any longer of being president of the entire country. He is the leader of a faction that is trying to impose systematic cruelty upon all the rest of us. And that's why it wasn't that Sarah Sanders was kicked out of a restaurant because she lies every day. It wasn't until we had 3-year-olds in cages that these people couldn't go into public. Too bad on them.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.